and find a seat, and we'll get started. It's a nice rainy Sunday. Glad to see everybody out. I've asked Nick Lay, if he would, to go ahead and start us off with a prayer this morning, so we'll turn that over to him.
Let's pray. Our dear Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this day that you've given us and for the rain that we have. We just ask that you be with us through this class period and through this worship. Please help us to be attentive and learn something from your word. Just bless this time we have together and the rest of this day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Nick. So this morning, we're going to be talking about Barak. Now, those of you who are purists out there are probably saying, you didn't pronounce that right, because I think in Hebrew it's probably more like Barak or something like that. But when I was growing up, and Butch can attest to this, he was taught the same way. My Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Booth, God rest her soul, said Barak. And who are we to change that? So we're going to go ahead and go. I'm probably, to tell you the truth, I'm probably going to be transitioning all over the place with it when I was saying it. So just go with me. We're talking about this guy. So Hebrews 11, that's been our main theme of the class this quarter. And in that, you find these different personalities that we're going to be talking about from the Bible. And the main theme was, by faith, so-and-so did thus and so. So we have a kind of a character study. It's called the Faith Hall of Fame by some. And we get down to this part, and some call this like the honorable mention section, okay? I don't think that's quite accurate, because the person doesn't say these people are lesser. He just says, and what can I say? I don't have time to talk about all these guys. But it talks about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel. Now, if you look at that list, and the prophets. Okay, so he throws all them in there too. You look at that list, that's a pretty good group of heavy hitters there, aside from maybe Jephthah and Barak. You get to that point, you're thinking, oh, who were those guys? I was kind of looking around the auditorium as I was coming in, because I had the name up there on the screen. I was wondering how many people were leafing through the Bible saying, who's that guy again? So we're going to take a look at him. The class is going to be a little bit heavy on me talking along the first part of it, because there's a lot to get through. I was talking with Mike Kish last week, and he says, you're up here and it's kind of like a time warp. Whatever you went and did at home, you get to hear it doesn't translate, because either questions or things throw you off. You talk too fast, you forget this. I don't know where I'm going to be towards the end of this. But we're going to have some more questions and commentary towards the end of this, and a chance for that. So in looking at this, we've got Judges 4 and Judges 5, where we see this account. And Judges 4 is like the Cliff Notes section. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. You get to Judges 5, and it's more like the Steven Spielberg version, right? Because this is where Deborah and Barak actually have the song that they sing of the account of this. And if you go back in time, this is mainly the history that is shared by the Israelites. This is how they did it. They go and have a song, and that's how they remember, because their traditions and histories are handed down orally. Well, a song makes that easier to remember, right? So we're going to get in, look at both passages some today to get a look at that. I've asked Ken to go ahead and help me out, because he's going to read through Judges 4, first parts of it real quick. There's a lot of heavy words in there, so I gave it to Ken.
Yeah, thanks. Judges 4. After Ehud's death, the Israelites again did evil in the Lord's sight. So the Lord turned them over to King Jabin of Hazron, a Canaanite king. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Habroseth Hagorim. Sisera, who had 900 iron chariots, ruthlessly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help. Keep reading.
Let me stop right there.
Okay.
Thank you, Ken. So just to set this up, we see this cycle that we're so familiar with. Starts off with, letters are kind of small, but up there at the top, peace in the land. Israelites are serving the Lord the way that they should. Next one down, they do evil in the sight of the Lord. This is usually by going after other gods. They get in trouble. Next tick, God punishes them for forgetting. They become enslaved or oppressed. to the bottom, Israel cries out for help to the Lord. They're repentant. God raises up a judge to deliver them. Israel is delivered, and they're back up at the top in this cycle, but it's going to start all over again. Okay, go ahead, Ken.
Starting in verse 4. Deborah, the wife of Lapidoth, was a prophet who was judging Israel at that time. She would sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites would go to her for judgment. Verse 6. One day she sent for Barak, that's how I pronounce it, son of Abimenam, and who lived in Kadesh in the land of Naphtali. She said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Call out 10,000 warriors from the tribe of Naphtali and Zebulun and Mount Tabor, and I will call out Sisera, commander of the Jabin army, and along with the chariots and the warriors to the Kadesh River. There I will give you victory over him."
Okay, and last one.
Last one. Barak told her, "I will go, but only if you go with me." "Very well," she replied, "I will go with you, but you will receive no honor in this venture, for the Lord's victory over Sisera will be at the hands of a woman." So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. At Kadesh, Barak called together the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 warriors went up with him. Deborah also went with him.
Okay, so that gives us kind of the main start of the account that we read about there. So we want to go back over, and I wanted to go through and kind of talk a little bit about, I call it the cast, but the characters that we're seeing in here. Now, just very quickly, though, I'd like to go back for a minute. How many of you remembered the story of Barak from Bible class? The one that sticks out? We got probably some have taught it a lot, right, Trudy? So this is before I started this study, this was my recollection of what, and this is probably just my elementary school head going through and sorting this out, but it was, of course, Israel falls off the skids. A judge comes up who is Deborah. Barak's called to fight. Barak's a chicken, so Barak won't go unless she goes, and they give the victory to a woman. Okay. That's pretty not accurate, okay? Some of that's accurate, a lot of it isn't. There's a little bit more depth. In fact, as I was going in to start doing this, I thought, well, maybe the study more into the history of what they're dealing with and their accounts are going to give us a better idea of looking at Barak and, okay, quite honestly, is he a chicken or not? So we'll look at that. But going back through the cast, we've got Jabin, king of Canaan, or one of the kings. We'll see that Canaan's a pretty complicated place to figure that out. Sisera is the commander of Jabin's army. He's got 900 chariots. We know he's a ruthless man. We also know that it's possible he's more of a mercenary type and not just serving Jabin, but maybe some of the other kings, maybe even to the highest bidder, who knows. Deborah, the judge of Israel, and Barak, the general who Deborah says he was called by God. Okay, I'm going to, right there, that's also the other kind of preconceived notion I had. Well, Barak's a general. Barak's not a general, okay? Barak is a regular guy, a farmer, a carpenter, a fisherman. We don't know exactly what he was doing, but he is not a military man per se, and we'll look more into that also. And then Jael, nice host, but you better sleep with one eye open, okay? Well, that's kind of I'm burying the lead there, but Jael is at the end who actually has the victory over the final victory over Sisera. Okay, so some of the background. Jabin, I started looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, is this the king who comes back to life? Because Joshua 11 has an account in there when the king Jabin of Hazor, that's exactly who we just read about, saw what had happened. And this is when the Israelites first came in and took over Ai and had those victories, killed those kings. He hears about this, and so it starts listing off all these other kings that he gets together. And this is the nature of what Canaan is like, but we'll get into that more. King Jabin, so we're thinking, well, what's going on? Well, this can't be the actual Jabin who we're talking about in Judges 4 because Jabin gets killed here. And also, we know it's about 200 years past the time of when Joshua went and had this victory. So this is a different King Jabin. And what this might be, Jabin actually meant the wise or the discerner, a little bit of background there. But this is probably a name such as Herod or Caesar, where they have the name of a ruler that gets passed on. So this might have been King Jabin the third or fourth or fifth or whatever distinction they want to give him for that. So we get to Deborah. Interestingly enough, Deborah is a judge who's actually a judge. Okay? A lot of the other times we refer to these men as judges, but they're really more of a deliverer, a warrior that God brings up. And we don't necessarily have any accounts where they're sitting in judgment of anything. Deborah, however, is. She's the one that has her, she's kind of centrally located around Ephraim, and she's got her palm tree set up, and that's where everybody came to get these decisions made. And she's also a prophetess. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of Deborah, and I'll try not to get myself in too much trouble, okay? Here's a listing from the Biblical Archaeological Society of who Deborah is, just a short blurb, okay? Deborah, the only female judge in the Bible, excelled in multiple areas. Clearly one of the Bible's most outstanding figures, she served ancient Israel as a prophet, judge, military leader, songwriter, and minstrel. Okay, glowing report, and as it should be. Deborah was a great woman. However, this kind of got me back to thinking about Sesame Street. I'll explain that here in a minute. Does anybody remember the setup here? This is that song they sang, one of these things is not like the other. Yeah, got everybody on there. Okay. If you had to look at all those bolded listings and descriptions, which one of those would you think I'm going to have a problem with? Minstrel? Okay. It's a good guess. That's not the one I was going for, Mike. Military leader. Linda got it. Okay. So I'm going to get myself in all kinds of trouble, but I'm going to go ahead and dive into this. Women in combat. It's not like today. Back then, everything was physical, hand to hand, and it was just not done. So I'm not being sexist when I say that she's not a military leader. If you want to call me a bonehead sexist about things, there's plenty of other stuff I say that you can call me out on, but this isn't it. I'm going to back this up with Scripture. Not a military leader, beyond support for Barak and the conduit to God's will. She's the one who told him what to do and when to do it. But it was just not done in their time. Deuteronomy 5:18 through 20 talks about them getting ready to go into the promised land. The men fought. The women and the children actually stayed behind, well away from where the fighting was going on. Judges 9:52 through 54. Years later, the thought of being killed in battle by a woman did not sit well with Abimelech, and it probably would not sit well with any soldier of that time. Who remembers Abimelech? Larry? Yeah, okay. Larry's got it. I was going to throw that up there as just a little reminder. Abimelech is the son of Gideon. He's not a good guy. He's killed off all his brothers. And actually, while he's working as kind of the judge for Israel in one sense, God's not happy with him in another. He goes and attacks this one city. They're laying siege to a tower. A lady up in the tower says, hey, here's a millstone. That'd probably be good to throw out on somebody. And she does so. Crushes his skull, but he's with it enough to realize he's going to die. He tells his armor bearer, run me through so they can't say a woman killed him. 1 Samuel 4:9. This is the Philistines when they're actually fighting against the Israelites. The Israelites have made a mistake because they didn't really consult God, but they took the Ark of the Covenant with them, thinking this is going to be our lucky charm. This will take care of it. Philistines gather up and muster themselves to fight. And they say, fight as never before, Philistines. If you don't, we'll become the Hebrew slaves. Stand up like men and fight. Jeremiah 51:30. God decrees the Babylonian army would lose courage and not fight. There in verse 30. Her mightiest warriors no longer fight. They stay in their barracks, their courage gone. They have become like women. Okay. Now, this is not a commentary on women's bravery, all right? It's commentary on location. They're staying in their barracks, like the women stay out of the fight. Okay, so it's not, the women are not expected to fight. So this is not a bash on women at all about their courage. It's a bash against the men who should be doing the fighting. Okay, so a military leader. I don't think we can give her that distinction. Is she a great leader? Oh, most definitely. And just not a military leader. And we see that in the account as it goes through, because Judges 4, 6 through 7, God has called for Barak, not Deborah. And Barak was the one who originally was promised the victory. If Barak had done what God had called him to do, without question, we wouldn't even be having this discussion, okay? But as we can see, Barak has different plans, and as usual, when man puts his plans in front of God's, it doesn't work all that well for him. Then also in Judges 4, 8 through 9, Barak balks, and Deborah responds, "Very well, I will go with you." Well, what can we infer from that? Well, probably that she wasn't originally going to be going, right? So she makes this change. Okay, I'll go with you then. And then Judges 5, this is kind of the from the song or the history. The princes of Issachar were with Deborah and Barak. They followed Barak rushing into the valley. Okay, so Barak's doing the fighting. And then a final thing, this one cracks me up. I don't know what the significance of it is, but evidently Deborah took a nap after the battle or something. Wake up, Deborah, wake up, wake up, wake up, and sing a song. Arise, Barak, lead your captives away, son of Binoam. Okay. So sing a song kind of equals write our history. So that's what they're telling her to do. She's not actively fighting. Okay. More in the background of Barak. He's not a general in the general sense, pardon the pun. Judges 5, 5:5, when Israel chose new gods, war erupted at the city gates, yet not a shield or spear could be seen among 40,000 warriors in Israel. Not much of an army if you don't have spears or shields at least. Whether they had swords, that's going to be another matter. It's probably the least of what they had. But we know that there's no standing army. That's not too unfamiliar to us, because we know even from our history back in the colonies, what they have going on is a system that's going to be a lot like the colonies. His leadership position is probably more like the militia in the American colonies. Like in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, there were problems in continuity and coordination in military strategy when you have regiments from so many different regions. So you didn't have Israel's army. You had a militia coming from Zebulun, Issachar, name all your tribes. And that has to be coordinated in order to fight. So Barak is a military leader. He's got this militia, but again, we're talking about the arms. Why didn't they have arms? Well, we get some insight into this. Now, this is going to be a couple of hundred years later, but it's talking about the Philistines who have taken control of the area. But I imagine they probably have the same type of restrictions as perhaps the Canaanites did that Barak is dealing with. 1 Samuel 13, 19, there were no blacksmiths in the land of Israel in those days. The Philistines wouldn't allow them for fear they would make swords and spears for the Hebrews. So they might be under the same situation here. This is the reason why you're not seeing shields and spears. So the weapons of choice, they might have had some swords. Remember, they might have had granddaddy's sword handed down to them if they plundered one from the Egyptians, right? But what's maybe more likely? What's your choice? Pickaxe, sickle, pitchfork, hoe, whatever garden implement you happen to have at the time on hand. That's what you're fighting with. Or in the case of Shamgar, this is the judge who's mentioned immediately preceding Deborah. He has an ox goad. I don't know what an ox goad looks like. I know it probably has some heft to it because he killed 600 Philistines with it. So the thought of that is we are not talking about a well-trained, well-supplied army. You're talking about a bunch of different people who have a bunch of different, I guess their reasons for fighting are going to be varied. And this comes into a problem because you would see things with the tribes going back and forth. Even when they came in to take over the land, it's like they took over the first land and said, okay, this is yours, yours, and yours. And all those tribes are like, okay, we're taking our land. Hey, wait a minute, we still got these guys over the river we have to take care of. You have to come fight with us. And they said, okay, yeah, we'll come and fight. Then sometimes you would have somebody go in and have a fight, and I question why this would happen, but one tribe would say, why didn't you call us to fight? I don't know if they said, well, my grandpappy was killed by him and those guys, we want to go and get our revenge, or, hey, we could have had some plunder there too. Why didn't you let us in on it? No telling maybe what that motivation would be. But we know that this was a problem. Okay. Another question comes up. Why are we even fighting these guys? Why are the Canaanites even a problem? You go back to Joshua 17, and he's talking about the allotment of the land. Then Joshua said to the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, the descendants of Joseph, since you are so large and strong, you will be given more than one portion. The forests of the hill country will be yours as well. Clear as much of the land as you want and take possession of the farthest corners. And you will drive out the Canaanites from the valleys too, even though they are strong and have iron chariots. Wow. This seems to be a different way of things happening than what Joshua laid out for them. I think this goes back to, and again, we're getting into my opinion, but I think what Joshua has laid out is, if you follow God and do what he says, this will be your outcome. We know from their history that's not what they did. But also, we get a glimpse of this when you go to Judges 3, because it talks about God leaving nations around them as a test. It said some of them, for the generations who didn't know what war was even about, who didn't fight the Canaanites, they're going to be left to test them, but also to test if they're going to obey his commandments. So part of this is God's hand leaving these people around. So this is why we're fighting the Canaanites. All right, let's talk about chariots, my favorite part of the whole thing. Okay, I'm going to read through this. It's a little long, but bear with it. Historical records show that chariots underwent many changes during the late Bronze and early Iron Ages periods. Historian Ian Harvey explained at the Battle of Kadesh, the Egyptians used quick and maneuverable chariots that carried 2 soldiers. The Egyptians famously used the chariots as mobile firing platforms for their composite bows. Okay, so this is the first group we're talking about, the Egyptians. And we're going to talk a little bit about this battle at Kadesh. This is different than the town of Kadesh that Ken read about in Naphtali, where Barak is from. This is a little bit further up around Damascus. But this is an idea of what the Egyptian chariot would look like. It's small, it's mobile, carries probably at the most 2 people. And you've got a driver, and sometimes there were shield bearers and such like that. And then you've got the guy with his composite bow on the back. Now we're going to read about the other area's superpower at the time is the Hittites. The Hittites, who bred stronger horses, used larger and heavier chariots. They were used to batter enemy lines. Hittite chariots carried 3 soldiers, some say 4, a driver, a spearman, a bowman, and a shield bearer. Okay, so that's going to be more what this thing looks like. So interesting thing about the chariots and how they evolve and how they're used. Most of the history that they have about how these things were used goes back to a battle of Kadesh. And this is probably going to be about, depending on who you think has the right timeline, it's either going to be a few years before this happens with Barak, or it's going to be about 60 years. But here you see an artist's depiction. You've got the Egyptian chariot in the front, kind of minimalist. In the back, they've got the Hittite chariot. To me, that's not doing it quite the justice that you could give it. I think it's going to be a little bit bigger like that, a bit bigger than that. So here's our 2 superpowers. And you've got the Hittites up in the north that have conquered all that country around where we now, I guess, Greece up in that area and the Mediterranean. Down below, you've got the Egyptians and the pharaohs. That's what they control. And this is where their battle at Kadesh is. It's down around the Syrian area. However, we're going to be talking about a battle that's closer here down towards Megiddo. Now, what you'll notice is, well, where the Canaanites and the Israelites are living, well, that, they say, is controlled by the Egyptians. Well, in a sense, it was. But you can see over here, they even have from records kind of the battle lines. If you look at the kind of triangles there, those are called phalanxes, where they actually had the infantry or the foot soldiers. You didn't just go into battle with chariots. You went into battle with infantry, and they went through. And what they found out was the Egyptians were very smart. They decided, well, if we go toe-to-toe with people and everybody's in line and shields and spears, it gets a long, prolonged battle. I can't shoot the guy who's got his shield in front of him. What if I take my chariot around the back and shoot from there? So they flank him, you know. So they go and do that, and they find that's a very effective way. Well, Hittites do it one better. And they say, why do I want to flank them when I could just drive right through them? And that's why they take their big chariots. Okay? Canaanite chariots might have been a combination of the two styles, perhaps a little bit bigger. But if you look, you can see from this relief here, kind of the devastation. Those two guys who are not in the chariots are not having a good time at battle, okay? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Canaan and the politics at the time. The Canaanites had developed a strong agricultural and commercial civilization. Their life is centered around certain important cities. Their cities are usually built on a low-lying hill in the midst of rich, encircling plains. They are provided with thick mud walls behind which the inhabitants felt secure from attack. Over each city ruled a petty king. Now, when we talk about that, we're not talking about a guy who's jealous and you know, holds grudges against people. We're talking about somebody he's a king, but he's only a king for what's around him, right? So Canaanite does not have a centralized king. Canaanites have different cities on these plains with different fortified structures, and inside of that lives a king who has control of just basically what's around him. Getting a little late on time, so I'm just going to go past that. The one thing I did want to talk to is the very last sentence, though. The diversified physical contour of Palestine likewise strengthened a tendency towards separation rather than unity. So the reason that the Egyptians had such an easy time of controlling the area was that they would pit these kings against each other. Make an alliance with me, I'll give you money. And so they could have these guys at each other's throats. Sometimes these guys would agree in a fight against somebody like the Israelites, but most times they were kind of pitted against each other. So we're going to take a look at the area where the battle happens, and it's around the Valley of Jezreel. This is kind of a famous area if you start thinking about all the events that happened, because up at Mount Carmel, that's where Elijah and the prophets of Baal had their contest. Go down here to Mount Gilboa, that's where Saul and his sons are killed in battle by the Philistines. Now we're going to be up here at Mount Tabor, which is not too far. Kadesh is where Barak lives, is just kind of over towards the Sea of Galilee side, so it's pretty close to his hometown. Okay, so Barak gets the call. And Deborah, who's down here towards Ephraim, you see her little palm tree down there, that gives it away. She is going to call for Barak. Now, that's not something that's really convenient to just have happen, because he's up here around Kadesh, she's down in around Bethel. It's about 53 miles from Bethel to Mount Tabor. So that's going to be a little bit further. So 60 miles, let's round it off. 60 miles back in their time is a pretty long way to go. To top that off, we're going to be taking the scenic route. We don't travel the main roads. And why is that? Well, Judges 5 says there, in the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, and in the days of Israel, people avoided the main roads, and travelers stayed on winding pathways. These people are going around incognito, and it's probably because if they're on the main roads, they're going to get abused. Okay, so here's a shot of Mount Tabor. Yeah, I meant to say back, I think that's an artist's rendition down there in the middle square there, Mount Tabor. It looks like, it almost looks like somebody plopped a basketball down in the middle of the land. I don't know if it's shaped like that, but you can see there is a good view all around the valley, so you could see who's coming at you and what's going on. So we'll get into the battle. Judges 4. When Sisera was told that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, he called for all 900 of his iron chariots and all of his warriors, and they marched from Harosheth Hagoyim to the Kishon River. So that's down, he gets ready, he's going right there. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Get ready, this is the day the Lord will give you victory over Sisera, for the Lord is marching ahead of you." So Barak led his 10,000 warriors down the slopes of Mount Tabor and into battle. When Barak attacked, the Lord threw Sisera and all his chariots and warriors into a panic. Sisera leaped down from his chariot and escaped on foot. Then Barak chased the chariots and the enemy army all the way to Harosheth Hagoyim, killing all of Sisera's warriors. Not a single one was left alive. Okay, so that's kind of the description from chapter 4. Now we're going to get into chapter 5, which is interesting. It's the song that they have. I'm just going to put a brief outline together. Song of Deborah and Barak. This is their history. Number 1 point, great when the people follow God and he fights for them. Point number 2, you other tribes from the region that stayed home are losers. Okay? Those tribes that answered the call are awesome. When you think about it, in the song it mentions several tribes. God only called them to get from Naphtali and Zebulun, the warriors, but it speaks about Issachar and I think Benjamin coming to their aid, which is what you would expect to be done. So she says they're awesome. God routs Sisera's army. Jael is awesome. And Sisera's mommy is looking for him, but he is not coming back. Okay. There's a lot of snark in this, both against the tribes who didn't fight and then against Sisera. You can tell there's a lot of animosity. Well, if somebody's going to treat me cruelly for 20 years, probably I'd be mad at them too. Okay. So this gives us more of an outline of the actual battle, though. The king of Canaan came and fought at Tanash near Megiddo Springs, and they carried off no silver treasures. The stars fought from heaven. The stars in their orbits fought against Sisera. The Kishon River swept them away, the ancient torrent, the Kishon. Okay. Interesting thing. Going through some commentaries, it amazes me how often, even if it's from a theological seminary or somebody who's the author of that, they always seem to be having the bias of, well, we know God didn't really perform miracles, so this must be what happened. And there were a lot of people who had kind of that thought process. They contend that this was a military maneuver concocted by Deborah using superior knowledge of the topography and the weather patterns to reel in Sisera unwittingly into his demise. That's very unlikely. Why would I say that? It's because kings know when to fight. Okay? 2 Samuel 11:1, in the spring of the year when kings normally go out into war, David sent Joab and the Israel army to fight with the Ammonites. You don't go out when the weather conditions are not favorable to you. You know when to fight. And they knew how to fight. It's not likely that Sisera would take his 900 chariots into war if he thought there could be a chance of seasonal thunderstorms and flash floods. That seems pretty logical to me. And when you remember going back into chapter 4, then Deborah said to Barak, get ready, this is the day the Lord will give you for victory over Sisera, for the Lord is marching ahead of you. That kind of indicates it's a sudden thing. It's not, and we know from a lot of times that armies would get together and face off against each other and not necessarily do anything for a matter of time. You think about David and Goliath. He sat out there and taunted them for days on end. But she says, this is the time, this is the day. It's not like a weather pattern is erupting and then Deborah's, oh yeah, now seems like a good time. This is an act of God, and it's God telling Deborah to go fight now. Well, how about them stars? Okay, yeah. All of my graphics budget went into that one, so I hope you guys... Are we talking figuratively or literally here? There's two schools of thought. And the first one is the reference to the stars from heaven, the stars in their courses or paths, is personification of the elements, the rains aiding the Israelites. Okay. That's not without merit. This is in chapter 5. It's a poetry or account or written in song. It's open to hyperbole and figurative language. Winners write the history books. That's another thing to remember. So I could see how somebody would make that case, and I'm not going to fall down hard one way or the other and say I've got it right or I don't, but I don't think that this is the case. When you look at the rest of Judges 5, there is not a lot of figurative language used. It has some references to princes from the tribes of Issachar, I think. Well, that's kind of funny because there's no kings or princes at that time, so what are they talking about? But that's about the only thing. The rest of it reads pretty plainly in plain language. So the second thought or second school of thought. The reference to the stars from heaven is literally some force from the sky interceding, whether it's elemental, such as lightning or hail, or divine intervention from a heavenly host. Okay, that's also not without its merits. Why? Well, we know it's happened in the past. I'm running out of time here. You think of the plagues of Egypt, the last plague was actually God going through and striking down the firstborn himself. And then in 2 Kings chapter 19, 185 Assyrians killed by the angel of death in one night. Okay, so in thinking of it, is it figurative or literal? An event for the Israelites coming into the promised land is another thing we can look to. Joshua 10. I'll kind of skip through this. They had a fight with a bunch of kings. They start routing them, and the enemy starts fleeing. Well, in that, God sends a huge hailstorm, and it says that more enemy soldiers were killed by the hail than were by the swords of the Israelites. So my thought on that is probably it's talking about more direct intervention than somebody looking at it and saying, no, the weather pattern seems favorable, let's go do this. I think God is out there. She says God is marching before you. I think that's more of a literal translation. Okay, all interesting stuff, but now we get to the juicy part. I've got my little girl power thing up there. Barak is told he will get no honor in the victory as it will come at the hands of a woman. Who do you think that Barak thinks God is talking about there? Okay. Do you think he's talking about Jael, or do you think he's talking about Deborah? I think he thinks God is talking about Deborah. That's not how it turns out. My bet is that he thinks, okay, Deborah's going to get the glory for this. Okay, so we see in Judges 4, meanwhile Sisera ran, okay, this is after their defeat. Sisera ran to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because Heber's family was on friendly terms with King Jabin of Hazor. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, come to my tent, sir, come in, don't be afraid. So he went into her tent, she covered him with a blanket. Please give me some water, he said, I'm thirsty. So she gave him some milk from a leather bag and covered him again. You can see the diabolical plan she has. She's giving him warm milk, right? Okay, stand at the door of the tent, he tells her, and if anyone comes and asks you if there's anyone here, say no. But when Sisera fell asleep from exhaustion, Jael quietly crept up to him with a hammer and a tent peg in her hand. Of course, she had to get changed into her pearl tiara before she does this. Renaissance painters crack me up, I'll just say that. Anyway, when Barak came looking for Sisera, let me back up. She ran the tent peg in her hand, and then she drove the tent peg through his temple into the ground, so he died. When Barak came looking for Sisera, Jael went out to meet him. She said, come and I will show you the man you are looking for. Okay. So, and then the end of Judges 4, wrapping it all up. Verse 23. So on that day, Israel saw God defeat Jabin, the Canaanite king, and from that time on, Israel became stronger and stronger against King Jabin until they finally destroyed him. So the question, why is Barak even in Hebrews 11? I thought he wasn't going to get the honor in this venture. That's interesting. Let's do a little bit of study on Barak, and I think we have to go back to the ultimatum he lays down. He's willing to go even though some see this ultimatum he places to have Deborah as a character flaw. Nick, now's the time to run with a mic here for people. Got a question. What do you think is the motivation behind his request? Just raise your hand and... Okay, that's a short one. I don't think we need the mic. He sees her leadership. Okay. Any other ideas on motivation? Larry?
I would assume that she has credibility with the people, so he thinks if she's not going, then the people will wonder, well, why isn't she going? Because she's been our conduit to God, and maybe Barak felt she had some. If she went along, then God would deliver on his promises.
Okay. Yeah, there's two thoughts wrapped up in that. One is in today's vernacular, she's got street cred, right? The other is she's a direct conduit from God. That's what I'll go through. Here's some thoughts I had. The other tribes might not listen to me, but Deborah, oh yeah, they're going to listen to her. There are plenty of people saying they're prophets around. I want to know if you have skin in the game. Barak wondering, okay, is God really telling me this, or do you have an axe to grind against these guys? Or that thought of, I want a good luck charm. God surely won't let his prophet go down to defeat, right? So if you're along, I've got it in the bag. Or maybe if we give him the benefit of the doubt, his thinking, I want a straight conduit to God's will and not wait or rely on messengers. On the whole, it seems to be a negative for him. So I don't know if we can really ascribe to him exactly what his thought process is, but it, on the whole, turned out to be kind of a negative toward him. To his credit, though, he's willing to stick it out. Why does he get kudos as a hero of faith? Well, Barak doesn't bend to the pressure of cultural norms if they conflict with God's instruction. There's a lesson for us in that. We've got all kinds of things flying around in our culture right now that don't fly. But he's willing to be seen as subservient to Deborah. That's no small thing. That is a huge cultural shift from what the norm is. He's willing to face ridicule from the enemy and his own people even, from following a woman. I can just see the battle lines drawn and the enemy out there taunting him. Hey, Barak, did mommy say you could come fight today? He's facing ridicule for that, but he sticks around. Barak doesn't let pride get in his way. A little bit talking about what we said formerly with that, with the cultural thing, but also he's willing to have the song or the history not be all about him. He could have cut and run once he heard the victory would not be about him, right? Have we had some other personalities in the Bible who had a problem with this, not getting the credit? Saul. Okay. Everybody remembers Saul gets bent out of shape because the ladies come back in singing, Saul's killed his thousands, but David's killed his tens of thousands. It's a big deal to these guys, how they're seen, what their legacy is, what their history is. So why does Barak get kudos? Another reason, Barak's brave. There's no way to put it about. You know, my first thought as a kid was, oh, you know, he's chicken. He won't go unless Deborah goes. That's not it. He's leading men into a buzzsaw. They're vastly outgunned. It would be the equivalent of, in our terms, probably guys taking handguns down to fight tanks. And this is the spirit that God is looking for. Be strong and courageous and do not be afraid was a direction that he gave to the Israelites when they were coming into the promised land. So he's definitely following that spirit. And he's willing to set his own ideas aside on how to fight. If I was going to go out and fight all of those guys, the Canaanites, if I'm thinking about my own strategies, I'm going to be going by night and trying to burn down the chariot house, right? I'm not going to be rushing down from my safe point or my advantage on the high ground in the mountains to rush out into the valley and fight a bunch of chariots. He's brave. And he remembers where his strength comes from, and it does not look at the odds that are against him. He sees all those chariots. It looks like an unwinnable situation, but he's told, obey God, and God will give you the victory, and he believes it. That's why Barak is a hero of faith. All right, any questions or comments? We've got a few minutes here before we have to wrap up. Ed, let's wait for Nick's coming on up with the mic. Thanks. No, you're good. Oh, and Ken's got one there too.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you.
Nick, you let Ken beat you. Wow.
I'm really,
Go ahead, Edward.
hey, I'm really impressed here that you put in there, be strong and courageous and do not be afraid. You know, that's the same terminology that Joshua used
Yeah.
to Israel when he said, do not be afraid and have good courage.
Yep.
That's impressive.
Well, that's exactly what his spirit was, and that's why I think he's in there. Anybody else? Oh, Larry, Nick's getting his workout. Get the mic over to Larry.
Yeah, I think you've kind of pointed out the moment of truth came when Deborah said, okay, give up the high ground and march into the valley. And it says that God waited until they took the first step before he acted. And I think that's a lesson to us, that are we willing to take the first step and trust that God will act?
Yeah, and that's not the first time that the Israelites are kind of called to that. If you remember, when they're going across the river into the promised land, it's not until the priests step forward and put their feet into that river that Jordan River goes wide and gets dry. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Up here. Marshall's up here.
You've made the point a couple times, over and over again, chapter 3, they didn't do what God said. Chapter 2 is very clear. You didn't obey my commands, you're going to have a problem. So we need to think, well, God said to do it this way, do we really have to?
Yeah, indication is you better do it his way. Okay. All right, well, thank you so much, everybody.